Berlin is about 7 to 8 miles west of Ocean City, Maryland, on the Atlantic coast, in Worcester County, Maryland, which is the only county in Maryland that is aside the Atlantic Ocean. I grew up in the town of Berlin, Maryland, here on the lower eastern shore, and I, like many kids, went off to college, and back then the idea was go to college and get a job on the other side of the Chesapeake Bay. And when I fortunately first got a degree in the first graduating class of Chesapeake College, and then went on and got a bachelor's degree at the University of Maryland College Park. That was when, and my wife and I got married, and we had to make a very important decision. Were we to stay on the western shore, as we used to call it, and probably make more money than anybody in either of our families had ever dreamed of, or did we want to go back home? And we decided to go back home. And at first we thought we'd lost our minds, and a lot of our friends thought so too. But it started to work out. The town of Berlin was still continuing to die. We moved into town back, for me, the town of Berlin in 1974. And businesses were still closing. It was interesting that the town had been thriving at the turn of the last century, from the 19th into the early 20th century. It was growing, it was prospering, it had a lot going for it. And then came the Great Depression. And like thousands upon thousands of communities throughout the country, it never really got back to where it was. It didn't even get to a fraction of where it was before the Great Depression. And downtown on Main Street, there were more businesses that were warehouses and empty than there were active businesses. And the businesses that were still there were like lawyers' offices and insurance offices, administrative and clerical things, but the retail had been slammed. Fortunately, a couple of folks got the idea of revitalizing one of the old buildings right in the heart of downtown. Led to 10 families getting together and investing and buying the Atlantic Hotel. The Atlantic Hotel had been there since, well, the original one was back in the mid-1800s, but the newly rebuilt one was built right after the first fire. And so it's in the late 1800s. They had each invested $100,000 to get started. So that's $1 million. And he called him and says, folks, he said, the good news is this can be done. The bad news is the $100,000 is not going to do, each of it's not going to do it. We're going to need a lot more money than that. So we have to decide if we're going to stop and just sell the property, or do we continue down this road? And in a very short time, it didn't take weeks and months, in a very short time, each of the 10 families made the commitment, which has never been revealed, for the second investment. And a couple years later, it was completed, and that, I think, took the revitalization effort to a whole new level. They weren't trying to make an investment where they were going to make a lot of return. They were hoping maybe someday they'll break even, but they knew it would be something that would give them, their families, and the community satisfaction and pride. So I got to see all this firsthand. First as a newspaper editor, later as the local newspaper publisher. But that background allowed me to interview people, do business with advertising and promotion for the new businesses, and to see the evolution firsthand. And then as mayor, we were able to accelerate the process. I think that's the proper word. We certainly didn't originate this idea, but we certainly supported it with great enthusiasm. And what has happened is, over time, is that as newer business coming in have come in with the idea, I'm not here to compete, I'm here to complement. And small boutiques and shops like that, they're kinds of things that never did well in malls. And now that malls are kind of on a shaky ground, the small boutiques and restaurants and shops are doing better than ever. For most of my life, there was maybe 2 restaurants and 2 bars. So you're talking 2, and now I don't know, it must be close to 12 or 15, and they're all doing well. And they're also, one of the things I think is also important is communities can support each other. So Ocean City, we never looked at it as an adversary, and they certainly weren't concerned about Berlin, but my gosh, when it was a bad beach day, they were more than glad to suggest to families, well, why don't you go over and spend a little time there? And the Chamber of Commerce and all these businesses got together and supplied the hotels and motels with dozens and dozens of packages of brochures. And Main Street was one of the things that we started as well. The mainstream movement. It's interesting because it was a fairly new program, but we had the right things in place. We had the interest. We had several years of trying to see what we could do on our own, and became named a Maryland Main Street community. And I'm almost positive we were the first, but it blossomed quickly. Well, revitalization, in my opinion, never stops. It evolves. And each generation has to determine, what to save and preserve and protect, but what new things to complement that with. And that's going to vary from community to community. There's not like one format, one form that you press these buttons and forget the others. No, it depends on your proximity, how many visitors you can accommodate, whether you want to encourage people to stay nearby, maybe not made in your downtown, but maybe just a couple miles out of town. There might be a major highway that would be perfect for guests to stay with the proper development. You don't have a beginning and end, because once you stop evolving, you start dying. And if all of us as human beings could renew ourselves, I think we'd jump at it. But towns can. You can't always get everybody to agree before you do it. You just have to have a core group that believes in it and is willing to stick their neck out a little bit. And but then when it's done, it's amazing. The naysayers go hide in the corners.